From New York and on the new Hot 97 app, Ebro in the morning on Hot 97.
Ebro in the morning. That's Laura Stiles, that's Rosenberg. And this is New York's own Andrew Yang.
That's
Give
right.
it up for him one time. Lives up the block, took some time out for us today.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
So I got a tweet from someone in the Yang gang a few days ago, and our producer Griff has been working feverishly to communicate with your team and get you back on the program. We're our fans, and I got this tweet. It said, when are you having Andrew Yang back on the show? And I said, look, he's running around in the nooks and crannies of America right now. He lives up the block. You know, when he gets time, he'll come by. 48 hours, boom, Andrew Yang back on the show.
Look at that, man. That's like you ask for it and then it happens.
That's kind of like the freedom dividend.
It's a little bit like that. If enough of us say we should have a dividend of $1,000 a month, then it will happen because this is a democracy and we can do what we want.
Is that the main point of the dividend? To drive that home? Is it about putting money in people's pockets or about the principle of what we're capable of as a country?
You know, it's both of those things, but it's more profound. I've been giving $1,000 a month to families around the country for a number of months now. I recommend it. If anyone...
if you got it to give.
Well, yeah, if you got it to give. It's the best use of funds I've ever had. And one of the recipients, I'm going to see him later this week, Kyle Christensen. He lives in Iowa Falls, Iowa, with his mom who's recovering from cancer. So he's been getting $1,000. I see him on a return visit, and he seems like a different man. And I'm like, hey, you seem great. And then he told me, he's like, look, I use some of the money on bills and stuff around the house, but then I use some of the money on a guitar. And I've been playing shows for the first time in years. This local band now wants me to play with them. And he was so proud telling me this. And so for him, it's a guitar. For the Fassies in New Hampshire, it's car repairs, being an inconvenience instead of a crisis. Right. For Mallory Shannon, it's the ability to go back to school. If you imagine what $1,000 a month means in people's hands, it means a better day-to-day stress level, better relationships, better decision-making. This is something we can do for our people if enough of us get together and say, this is how we're going to rewrite the rules of our economy to work for us.
Do you feel like, what do you say to the critics of that are out there that have kind of tried to slam you about giving out basically prize money around as you campaign? What do you say to those people?
You know what's hysterical is like if I spent millions of dollars on TV commercials and paid consultants and an army of canvassers, everyone's like, that's cool. I actually just give money to Americans who can do whatever they want, and that's problematic. I mean, think about it. I mean, there's one candidate that literally is spending tens of millions of his own money on ads. And I'm just looking at it being like, there are probably better things you could have done with that money.
Although you break it down on your website, right? How it would be done. But for the people who are just tuning in, because, you know, we had a lot of people, at least a lot of our audience that I saw on social media, that as soon as they saw their interview, they were very much about Yang Gang, right? Can you just break it down where the money comes from?
Oh, definitely. So I'm a numbers guy, and big picture.
You don't say the math thing on your jacket.
Yeah, the math slogan and the little Pell pin's probably a clue. It does stand for Make America Think Harder, because we have to actually focus on the real problems in our society instead of getting caught up in all of these distractions. So our economy is at $21 trillion or so right now. And so if you look at what it would take to give each of us $1,000 a month, it's actually very affordable in the context of an economy that's literally like the biggest in world history. But the mistake we're making is that there are trillion-dollar tech companies like Amazon and Google and Facebook that are literally paying either zero or near zero in taxes. And anyone listening to this be like, there is no effing way that Amazon can be paying zero in taxes. But it is. It's like, you can look it up. Amazon's federal taxes, 2018, zero. And that is not even that unusual for them.
But isn't that under the guise of them providing jobs and taxable income to other people, and that's why the government gives them those breaks? Isn't that
well, I mean, there's a corporate, the corporate tax rate's not,
right.
Well, the corporate tax rate's not zero. I mean, they're playing a lot of games to make it zero. And Amazon's employing a lot of people, but it's also closing 30% of America's stores and malls. And think about how many people work in those stores and malls. Right. We're talking about hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of Americans. Right. And so if Amazon's trumpeting, it's like, hey, look, our fulfillment center employs 10,000 people. Oh, yeah, it does. But the malls that you closed employed 100,000 people. And then the 10,000 people in your fulfillment center are supplemented by 10,000 robots, which will then become 20,000. And then your 10,000 will shrink to 5,000. You know, so this is all what's happening in the real world, we have a massive revenue problem where if you have a $1 trillion tech company like Amazon paying zero, then of course you're going to look around being like, well, how do we pay for stuff? If you give us, the American people, our fair share, tiny slice of every Amazon sale, every Google search, every Facebook ad, every robot truck mile, hundreds of billions of dollars in revenue, and we can afford a $1,000 dividend for each of us.
And that would be the government assistance would be done.
Well, government assistance would still be there in the sense that there are millions of Americans who rely upon various programs, and I would not touch any of them because the last thing I'd do is like pull the rug out from under people. So the dividend would be universal and opt-in, and if you do choose to opt in, then you'd forego benefits from certain other programs, not housing, not healthcare, not a bunch of the bigger programs. And the people I've spoken to, if you're on a government program, a lot of the time you're bogged down by the fact that there are all these requirements that you have to fulfill, and you live in fear that someone's going to like stick it to you and be like, hey, you lose your benefits.
Of course.
Whereas the $1,000 dividend is yours no matter what, and it's per individual. So if you have two adults in your house, you have an 18-year-old kid, I mean, that can be $24,000, $36,000 a year. This is transformative, and this is what Martin Luther King was fighting for in the 1960s when he was assassinated. He called it the guaranteed minimum income for all Americans.
Yeah, a lot of people think this is a new thought.
Oh,
and
gosh.
It's so not new.
It's so not new. I'm to be the first to say this is certainly not Andrew Yang's idea. Thomas Paine was for it. Martin Luther King was for it. In his 1967 book, Chaos or Community, he said we're going to have to move in this direction. And to me, I get frustrated because we celebrate his birthday every year, and like no one talks about what he was actually
That's just good marketing.
championing.
Come on, man. America loves to market.
But we've
Marketing machine.
sanitized the image of someone who was fighting for something fundamental.
Well, they don't talk about his anti-war stance either. They keep him very safe as the
Just the dream. Just the dream, man.
right.
Yeah, exactly. And it's
Because he was hardcore on moderates, too. Moderate liberals were a huge frustration for him, for Martin Luther King.
And he was an absolute pacifist. I mean, these people they kind of remove those pieces and just make him, I have a dream. I like that you're using that. Now, would it be even easier? It feels like it would be even more realistic to get this done if, for example, people who were over a certain tax bracket did get it. Because it doesn't feel like I would need I mean, it would be nice. I would love to get $1,000 a month. But at the risk of people who need it more, it seems like I'd be willing to be like, I don't need $1,000 a month.
That's a great question. And I've looked at the experience in a place like Alaska that's had a dividend for almost 40 years because of oil money. And in Alaska, everyone gets it from the richest Alaskan to the poorest. And because of that, it's super popular. It's easy to administer. I don't need to keep track of what everyone makes. And it doesn't seem like I'm getting it, you're not.
Right, because people don't understand the concept of that there are people who might need it more than you, so it's easier to just have everyone get it. So people don't, because you know what I'm saying? People who have money should not complain. They should understand that the poor need it more. But I understand people don't necessarily all feel that way.
Would we get like a spike and like all of a sudden everything goes up, the prices on everything go up because all these people are making more money?
So I've looked at what's driving inflation in our economy, and if you look up. First, we printed $4 trillion for the Wall Street banks for the bailout, and there was not meaningful inflation. So if anyone says like, oh, you have more money in the system, it causes prices to spike, it apparently does not. And if you look at our own experiences, a lot of things are staying the same in price or getting cheaper or better. Things like clothes, media and electronics, food, cars. Most of those are relatively stable. So what's making us miserable in terms of inflation? Housing, education, healthcare. Those are the three true sources of inflation.
Education, boy.
Yeah, education.
Housing.
Daycare, too.
Yeah, daycare has been but daycare is behind these other big three. And unless, so education, we all know college has gotten like 2.5 times more expensive.
It's crazy.
It's nuts. I don't know if you all have kids like I do, but you look up and you're like, what's it going to cost? What?
Yeah, how is it even possible
that.
How could a regular hardworking American send their kid to college? Like, it's becoming unrealistic in some ways.
Yeah, and the returns on a college degree are getting shakier too, even as they're stacking up the cost.
You have a master's and be unemployed.
Yeah. So you put this money in our hands, everything that's truly dynamic and competitive will stay more or less the same in cost. And then we need separate plans to bring down housing inflation and education costs and healthcare costs. But I looked at the reasons why those things are getting more and more expensive. It's not because we have more money. It's because there's actually a lot of restriction on each of those markets. Like if college gets more expensive, you feel like you don't have a choice, and then the government gives you massive loans, and you're like, all right, I guess that's what we're doing now. So we're up to $1.6 trillion in student loan debt, which I'd forgive a huge chunk of because that stuff's just crushing people. Healthcare, you have this massive private insurance market. You notice how the costs only go in one direction. Have you ever gotten a letter being like, "Hey, good news, it's getting cheaper this year"? They just keep same thing. They ratchet it up, and you're like, "Oh, I notice I don't have a choice but to pay."
Right.
And then housing, it's a similar dynamic, in part because of lack of incentives for affordable housing and NIMBYism, where everyone's for affordable housing until you say, "Hey, how about we do it next to you?" And then they're like, "Oh, I hate it now." So, those are specific reasons why costs are going up in particular areas, but it's not economy-wide at all.
Do you have an agenda or anything that you could speak to specifically towards reparations and Black Americans receiving some, just due around what they've experienced in America?
So the great thing about the freedom dividend is I think it sets us up better to have that kind of conversation. Now, the freedom dividend itself is not reparations, obviously. And when Martin Luther King fought for this, he said, look, we should just do this for all Americans. And he was suggesting that poor whites have more in common with poor blacks than with rich people. So that you lay the foundation, and I've already gone on the record and say we need to examine what reparations would look like. And there's a bill in Congress, I think it's called H.R. 206, that should move forward. And I would certainly not put my own opinions or judgment as to what it should look like next to the people that have studied this for decades. But that's where we need to go. We need to ask these questions and then get some answers from people who've looked at it deeply.
And you just said a huge chunk of college debt that you would be. Can you be more specific about what a huge chunk is,
and how you would do it, and how the schools would deal with that?
Well, the schools gotten paid off. Frankly, like now you have a bunch of debt holders. The schools got paid a long time ago.
So it's the debt holders.
It's really the debt holders.
So how do you handle that?
And this is analogous again to the bailout of Wall Street, where you had the financial crisis, and then we had a very key choice: do we keep people in their homes, or do we bail out Wall Street? And what did we choose? We chose Wall Street. Like, does anyone here remember voting for a $4 trillion bailout of Wall Street? No, there was no vote. And then do you remember anyone complaining, like, where are we going to get the money? Also nothing. Just like, well, it's bailout Wall Street time, so here's $4 trillion. Now, you have something similar going on with student loan debt. You're up to $1.6 trillion, and the choice is, do you want young people and older people, because people of every generation have this debt, do you want them living in the basement, paying off these loans for years, or do you want them buying homes, starting families, moving the country forward, maybe even starting a business? And you clearly want the latter. And so you need some skin in the game. So one thing I proposed is that if you commit 10% of your earnings, whatever they are, it could be zero, for 10 years, then you're done. And then everyone has a light at the end of the tunnel. And then to the extent there's a debt holder that has tens of thousands of dollars, then the government just cashes them out in whole or in part. So that if you're a debt holder, you're not that mad at this. But the main thing we do is liberate our people from the shackles of this life-changing debt. And I know this because I had $100K in educational loans myself in my 20s. I used to call it my mistress because I was like writing a check to another family. I was like, I hope they're having a good time there. Like it's like my
here's some more of my money.
Here's like $1,000 a month. Hope this kid grows up.
but in that of the government writing off these debt holders, there's new money being spent, right? Where does that money come from? What are we not spending on, so we spend on that?
And the biggest,
or is that money collected from corporations and the other money that you've talked about bringing in?
Yeah, the biggest myth in American life right now is that we don't have the money. we are the richest, most advanced economy in the history of the world. And what we're doing right now is we're advantaging our financial institutions over our people. Another example of this, Puerto Rico. It's criminal what's going on over there.
Right.
You have these sophisticated hedge funds who bought the debt, and then they're like, we want 100 cents on the dollar for this debt. And it's like crushing the people there. And I know what the games they're playing. And you look up, be like, look, man, you bought this debt for like 40 cents on the dollar. We're going to give you 45 cents, count yourself lucky and get lost. But instead, it's being used as like a bludgeon to, destroy the society there. So the same is true here with these financial institutions. When we cashed out the Wall Street banks, they called it quantitative easing just to confuse people. It's like, what the hell is quantitative easing? So
Right.
when it comes time to cash out our financial institutions, we have the resources if we have the will.
And so a lot of what I hear you saying, it's not as deliberate as Bernie or Elizabeth Warren when they straight go at corporations and billionaires and things like that. You have a more sophisticated, logical way of expressing basically we're going to hold these people taking advantage of the regular everyday people accountable, which we love to hear. But obviously, in there is that's where you get into all the dark money. That's where you get into the lobbyists. That's where you get into people digging up dirt and marketing slanderously against you. That's where, these major corporations are the ones that do that and have created such a terrible democracy for us. That's the billionaires and the corporations. So how are you going to manage making sure that they are at bay as well as accomplish what you want to accomplish?
Well, first, thank you, Yang Gang, out there, because we raised $10 million in the last quarter in increments of only $30 each. So my fans are almost as cheap as Bernie's. There's a lot of them, but there's zero corporate PAC money, and people can tell. I'm like the last person you would send if you wanted like the corporate flunky, because like they wouldn't send the random Asian dude, honestly. So I'm just here to solve the problems. And after I become president, the way we wash out the lobbyist cash, you want to repeal Citizens United, but the fact is money has been in politics for decades and will just find its way back in. So the way we beat it is we give every American $100 democracy dollars that we can use for any candidate or campaign, and that would wash out the lobbyist cash by a factor of 7 or 8 to 1. And I know this because I've been running for president for a little while now. So right now, if you
doing this longer than you.
I've been doing this longer than you.
If you get 10,000 Americans together, and then you look at them and they're like, hey, we want you to, fight opiates or like beat up the drug companies, which we should do. And then on the other hand, you have these piles of money in the form of lobbyists who are like, hey, how about you be nice to us? And as a legislator, you end up veering towards the money over time because it's easier to count and touch, and their food is better, and they can, just generally like throw stuff at you.
Vacation
you have more fun, and
and in some cases they'll hire you after you're done, really dark stuff. And so if you empower the 10,000 Americans with $100 each, then all of a sudden they're like, hey, we got $1 million for you. And then when the drug company or the lobbyist waves $50K at you or $100K at you, you'd be like, the people have millions at their disposal, and if I go against them, I'm going to lose. So we can line up the people and the money by putting democracy dollars in our hands. The problem right now is the money and the people are on opposite sides, and the money is winning. Like you said, our politics have been overrun by corporate interests and dark money.
So I'm sorry, guys. Can I want to ask you a little bit about just the campaign itself.
Sure.
When did you start having fun, and when did you start? When we talked to you the first time, don't get me wrong, you were taking your campaign seriously. But after a debate or two, we all came in here and said we saw the swag change. You started to believe a little bit more.
Now you're out here playing basketball. I just saw you singing Prince songs, karaoke.
When did you start? You
just cracked a couple jokes. Behind Beto, you was like, yes, Beto.
Preach,
Beto. I was like, oh, this guy's living life out here.
So when did things start to change for you and you started to believe a little bit more maybe that this is a real thing?
Well, it's, I'd say around the second debate, in part because you're with these other people in these contexts, and then you realize, I can beat these people. I mean, like they're not.
They let you talk.
Yeah, it's like where like there's nothing going on that's beyond you, and you start feeling like the people are waking up and getting behind you in a significant way, which happened over the summer, and the more fun we've had, the better we've done. And so then, you respond to that, where the tagline for my campaign is humanity first. And so it turns out people like if you're a human being, and I like it if I'm a human being. So just been leaning into that, and it's been invigorating. It's been a lot more fun.
Have you gotten to know any of the other candidates well that you didn't know before?
Sure. Some of us text each other. We're actually very friendly and collegial. Yeah, I was really touched when Bernie said a few days ago to a reporter, it's like, I like Andrew. I was like, Bernie likes me? That's fantastic. Because Bernie, he's hard to read. Like, you're around him, and you can't tell if that dude likes you or not.
I can see that.
Yeah. But I get along with most all the candidates really well.
Who would you say you talk to the most?
I see Tulsi Gabbard on the trail more often than I see the other candidates because I think our emphasis on certain parts of the country is the same. So I just see Tulsi and her team.
You don't think she's a Russian asset like Hillary?
I do not think that Tulsi Gabbard is a Russian asset. No. And the other thing is, like, if you're going to drop that kind of shit, like, you better have some like real facts behind it. Instead, it's like innuendo. It's like a candidate. Like, I was like, are you kidding me?
But
she's a freaking major in the U.S. National Guard. You can like drop that stuff casually.
I did feel weird though. I did feel weird when Trump got defensive about it. When Trump stepped out and was like, "How could you say that, Tulsi Gabbard?" I was like, "Why does he care what someone's saying about?" Was it just an attempt to fight with Hillary?
I think so.
I think he knows that anytime he's contrasting himself with Hillary Clinton, it's like a good day for him.
Yeah, that's his favorite thing to do.
Yeah, I mean that's like the freaking glory days.
Has Hillary become problematic for the Democratic Party at all with all of her kind of peanut gallery from the sideline stirring the pot?
No, I don't think it's really reached that level. I mean, people understand her place in history and the fact that she is the last nominee. And I think that the discussion around Tulsi ended up bringing certain things to light. So I don't think it's reached that level.
And also, we should remember that she won the popular vote. She was not the lame. The campaign was mishandled in some ways, but we should not pretend she was a lame duck. She got more votes than Donald Trump. If whoever wins this, if the Democrats win, they're going to be getting close to the same votes that Hillary Clinton got. She was not this. I just don't like that she's become an absolute pariah.
It's
for
true.
The
Democrats in particular tend to turn on candidates that did not win, like the major elections, in a way that I think is not very productive. I mean, like you said, she won the popular vote. It's a major national symbol and leader and inspiration for many.
Climate change. When on your site, we pulled combat climate change, which is one of those, obviously you have the deniers out there, and that's just ridiculous. But talk us through how you would combat that and some steps that we can all comprehend.
Some of the big things we have to do. Number one, we have to take the subsidies that we've been giving to fossil fuel companies for decades. I mean, tens, hundreds of billions of dollars. We need to zero them out, and then we need to start applying them instead to renewable forms of energy, wind, solar, other things that'll help move us forward. And then we need to price pollution. Now, what the heck does that mean? Right now, if you pollute, there are regs against polluting above a certain level, but you're not actually paying money out of pocket. So we should be taxing carbon emissions and then have a carbon fee and dividend. So if you pollute more, you pay more, and then you have a really powerful incentive to pollute less. You can actually then innovate to try and reduce your emissions over time. The fact is that we're way behind on climate change, and we all know who gets punished the worst when there's a natural disaster. It's poor people, it's people of color, it's people that don't have the resources to literally move to higher ground or get in a car and drive away. And so the freedom dividend will help a little bit by giving some people some resources to be able to protect yourself and your family. But we need to invest tens of billions of dollars, hundreds of billions of dollars in trying to make our communities more resilient for the ravages of climate change. I mean, you guys see what's going on out west with these wildfires? That's climate change, because the warming climate's dried up our forests, and we haven't actually accounted for that. So our U.S. Forest Service tends less than 10% of the forest in an effective way. So you have like a giant tinderbox. And then if you have the smallest spark, it ends up creating a wildfire that kills people, causes billions of dollars worth of damage. To me, we need to essentially militarize our maintenance of the forests, where you have to have like an army of people and machines and drones and heat sensors like in the forest being like, hey guys, like let's have some controlled fires and try and clear this stuff out. Because right now it's a tinderbox because of climate change. We are so far behind, and the people that are suffering the most are the people who have the least in our society.
Do you feel like with your ideas, when you're going around the country, obviously there's the Yang Gang, and they love how you're talking, right? Because it's very smart, it's informed, it's not some sort of circus sideshow. Like, you have fun, but people take you serious, and we love hearing you talk. But do you come across other politicians that are dealing with the bureaucracy on Capitol Hill? And do you talk to them about, the processes it would take to actually get some of this shit done?
Yeah, that's the fun thing about this. DC right now is a place where big ideas go to die. I mean, you have to see that. And when Obama became president in 2008, who did he tab as his partner? He tabbed like a longtime Capitol Hill senator and Joe Biden because he thought I'm going to need a lot of relationships to try and get some things done. It would be the same with me. After I'm president, I'm going to build a team of people that have tons of relationships and know-how on Capitol Hill. I'm not some jerk who's like, I'm going to do this like all different. Like, you need people who can actually get things done. But I do want everyone to imagine after I take office in 2021, people will be like, wow, Andrew Yang won. And we all know why I won. It's going to be the freedom dividend. I'm going to run on that. And then Democrats and progressives will be thrilled to put money into the hands of children and families to make us stronger and healthier. But Republicans and conservatives don't hate the dividend. Alaska, that's had the dividend for almost 40 years, is a deep red conservative state. It was passed by a Republican governor. And even his argument at the time was, who would you rather get the oil money? The government is just going to mess it up somehow, or you, the people of Alaska? And then the people of Alaska said us, and he's like, I thought so. So technology is the oil of the 21st century. And if you go to Republicans in Congress and say, hey, you want a dividend? They don't hate it. What they hate is a giant bureaucracy making everyone's decisions. They don't mind the idea of more Americans having economic independence and freedom. I don't need 80%.
That used to be what the Republican Party was about.
Yeah, it used to be. And you don't need 70% of Congress. You just need 51%. Can you imagine, let's call him Mitch McConnell. Can you imagine like someone in Kentucky being like, oh, money's going to hurt you, and then the people in his district will be like, are you kidding me? And then imagine me showing up in the district being like, hey, this guy's standing between you and the dividend that everyone else in the country is going to get or wants to get. Like, let them know what you think. Like, I can turn enough districts, especially because a lot of the Republican districts we're talking about, rural areas, red states on the interior that have gotten decimated by automation and the loss of manufacturing. Like, I'm fighting for them too. So we can pass the dividend in a bipartisan way. It's historically a bipartisan idea. And then Americans will look up and be like, oh my gosh, like this is such an unexpected feeling. Like I got money, I like it. Like, let's see if there's something else we could do.
I will say that I've seen you go on like the Ben Shapiro's, and you're not scared of sitting down with anybody. And I have seen the most praise from hardcore Trump supporters that they would totally vote for you if it came down to it. And I find that really interesting.
Yeah, there's one poll that showed that I'm one of the only candidates in the field that 10% or more of Trump voters would vote for, which means when I am the nominee, we win the whole thing. It's just that Democrats haven't figured out that I'm as sure a bet to beat Trump as we have.
The status quo Democratic thing is becoming, what they did with Bernie last time, that people feel like Bernie just got basically kicked to the curb on behalf of, kind of like a party favorite in Hillary. I think that's becoming more mainstream conversation. That could potentially happen to you, right?
Well, and to add to that, do you feel that like you look at it's never the person that the Democrat establishment wants. They wanted it to be Gore. It wasn't Gore. They wanted it to be John Kerry. Didn't work. They wanted it to be Hillary the first time. No, Obama comes out of nowhere. The establishment never gets it. You would be the right person to be the random Barack Obama of this election potentially, no?
Yeah, there are a lot of parallels there. And the establishment is not as in control this time as they were in times past, thanks in large part to Bernie from last cycle. So Bernie ran, and they kneecapped him, and everyone knows it, and they admitted it. It was essentially public. It was like, yeah, we sandbagged Bernie. And so this time the superdelegates don't vote until the convention. You remember last time with Hillary, like all the superdelegates were like, we're for Hillary, and then the count was already racked up before voting even started. So thanks to Bernie last time, they said none of that this time. You guys don't get a say. It's much more wide open structurally because people saw what happened last time.
What about just fear that they're just going to mess with the actual voting mechanisms too? I mean, there are a lot of problems, it sounds like, around actual voting machines.
Yeah, I'd be more worried about that in the general, honestly, because I think that the tampering that goes on is more likely
it's
to be...
It's coming from the right.
Yeah, I don't think it's Democrats on Democrat.
When I say the right, I mean all the way right, like Russia.
Yeah, you can keep going across the ocean, like to the right, yeah.
And what can we do about that, though? Like, I do feel... I have some deep concerns, though, that no matter who wins this nomination, they may not get a fair shake at the general.
It's a real concern, and a lot of the voting machines we're talking about are old and almost district by district. If we're going to ensure victory this time, we just have to run up the score. Because if you tamper with things, you're not going to tamper to the tune of, like tens of millions of votes or something. Like this past election was swung by, I think it was like 70,000 votes in some key states. So if you want to make the election tamper-proof, obviously you should do what you can to safeguard your machines and the rest of it. But I've looked into it. There's no silver bullet there. The main thing you want to do is just win by enough of a landslide so that it's totally moot. And that's a tall order. But I think it's achievable if we have the right candidate.
And that's Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania? Is that what you're...
Yeah.
It's Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Florida. Those are the key states that if we'd had 70,000 votes the other way, it would have gone to Hillary.
Let's dig in a little deeper. In the Mueller report, which I'm sure you've read, yes?
I haven't read that thing cover to cover. It's like, hundreds of pages in it.
Got it.
It's crazy.
And
believe it
were
with
there
Warren
from
section.
that report, were there any crimes committed, any problems that you saw in that Mueller report that you feel should be addressed moving forward?
No, to me, what's funny is that this impeachment proceeding really has originated because of this Ukraine call.
Right.
In part because the Ukraine call is easier to understand than some of the Mueller report contents and allegations. And the Mueller report's written in a very restrained way where it's not like this, it's like, and so that also adds to the fact that it's less obvious. This Ukraine call, everyone can understand.
Yeah,
It's
simple.
like, hey, they withheld aid and pressured another government to try and find some dirt on Joe Biden's family. I mean, that's pretty straightforward. Does it sound like something Trump would do? Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like what he did, but just the more obvious version. It's
Well, it's
almost
what they
insane.
did. It's what they've been doing.
That's what they've been doing.
Yeah, it's what they've been doing. So not the Mueller report, you didn't see anything, but you feel like this call is impeachment worthy.
I think this call is impeachment worthy because it's a pattern, because there'd been all of these things that had happened before that were very much
And there's been
analogous.
convicted criminals around the current president.
Yeah, so I'm on the record saying, look, I'm for impeachment, but I also think impeachment is potentially a massive loser for the Democratic Party because you need a supermajority of senators to actually go through with it, which would require literally like dozens of them to defect. And there's no indication that's going to happen. So if we play this out, impeachment fails, Trump says, look, I was innocent, and all the oxygen gets sucked out of the room for the next number of months. The way to beat Trump is not to talk about Trump. The way to beat Trump is to present a new positive vision for the country that we can all get excited about, that draws in people from every part of the political
Can
spectrum.
both happen at the same time? Can you continue down the impeachment path? You could continue to put out different messaging. Can these things happen in concert?
I hope so, but I will say that if the media spotlight focuses solely on impeachment, then Trump, in my mind, is winning. Because anytime you're talking about Trump, even in a negative way, he's winning.
Right.
Like the job of the Democratic Party has to be to present something that people find as compelling in a positive way, as Trump is in his own way. And for that, we need all hands on deck. It's not useful, in my mind, for the Democratic Party to focus all of its energies on impeaching Trump when it could just end up running aground in the Senate, which is quite likely if you look at it.
So
from
you
a number
would
standpoint.
rather Trump finish out his term, the Democrats or whoever the candidate, yourself, beat him in the election. Then what happens to Donald Trump, who's turned the office into a circus and basically ran a criminal organization from the highest office in America and embarrassed us around the world? What should happen?
Well, first, I'm pro-impeachment. I just wish that we could talk about something other than impeachment, like on the news programs every day. And I expect Trump to be there for me to beat in 2020. I expect to beat him. And then if you're asking, hey, would I want to prosecute him and his family and the team? If you look around the world, there's a clear pattern of governments that end up throwing the previous governments in jail. And that happens in developing countries kind of routinely. That is a pattern that the United States of America does not want to fall into, in my opinion. I'm not going to say what I would or wouldn't do because, you have to see if the facts have changed. But to me, the goal is to start solving the problems on the ground and not pretend that Donald Trump was a source of all the problems.
It's interesting because I firmly believe that the office will never be the same unless the people see some sort of reprimand for what is being called crimes. I don't believe that the American public will respect that office the same or the government the same unless, just like the rest of us, if there's wrongdoing, there's punishment. And if we're seeing and everyone's saying that there's wrongdoing and there's no punishment, there's a huge problem. A huge problem that is becomes, if ignored, an unfixable problem. We can solve all the stuff we want to solve and pad people's bank accounts with money and create jobs, and everybody goes on being hunky-dory like we have in the past, right? But unless we really start taking the fact that people who hold a certain office, police officers, politicians, the president, accountable for their actions, why are we telling other regular everyday people
to be accountable for their actions? Yeah, I am all for accountability. I think we're still pulling ourselves up from the financial crisis in part because Americans feel like no one was ever held responsible for that, which they weren't. And we need to throw people in jail if they do things that destroy millions of lives, or in the case of the pharma companies, kill tens of thousands of Americans. So I'm all about accountability. I think that our trust in institutions has disintegrated in large part because you look up and be like, why does it seem like the rules only apply to the little guy or gal and not the people at the top? All of that said, I think that you have to look at the course of history. President Trump has, as we all know, tens of millions of very hardcore fans, staunch believers who think that everything that's leveled against him
His
is just like
he's been on tour for
Years.
His concerts are fabulous.
And if you look at even historical precedent, when people have committed crimes as president, the next president has said, look, we need to move forward. To me, we're better served by trying to move the country forward than doing something that just ends up permanently inflaming tens of millions of Americans to say that their guy now is literally behind bars. Like that to me is not.
You think he becomes a martyr? You think he becomes a martyr in that way?
Yeah. Again, I mean, you end up with this unfortunate pattern because I'm all about accountability, but at the same time, at that level too. One of the reasons why in these other developing countries that they like throw political leaders behind bars is that if you take a group of people who run government for a particular period of time, like you can probably find something that you can like pin on them. Like you don't want to fall into a pattern where it's like, and I think Trump's behavior has gone beyond the pale, clearly.
And as you said, more could come out that could make you go, okay.
Yeah, but it sounds like you're saying these people, whether you're talking about developing countries, which you've brought up multiple times, or you're talking about America, you're sounding like these individuals that reach these heights in their career are above the law for the sheer fear that their fans might get their feelings in a bunch. That's what I'm hearing.
I wouldn't say above the law. What I would say is that we have to try and serve the interests of the country, big picture. And in some cases, I think the service of the country is to be a little bit more forgiving. That's my take. I understand people would have a different take.
It's interesting. Because I wish they were more forgiving on certain things with certain people too.
Oh, and that's I mean, we have to be forgiving of like the single mom who's like just trying to make ends meet. We have to be forgiving for the person whose like back is hurting and they can't make it into the job. Like that
first-time nonviolent drug offenders who've been in jail for the last 15 years because they sold some weed.
Yeah, who I would mass pardon as president on April 20th, 2021. I would say like anyone who's in jail for a nonviolent marijuana-related offense. To me, it's perverse that the president's always pardoning these rich, well-connected weirdos and not people that shouldn't have been in jail in the first place. I would pardon the anonymous Americans who should not have been in jail in the first place. So the forgiveness actually applies first and foremost to ourselves. Like we're living in an extraordinarily punitive, inhuman economy and society that's throwing young men and women behind bars for things that aren't even crimes in other parts of the country. We've criminalized poverty in so many ways. I mean, literally, you can get thrown in jail for not being able to afford bail. Like that's. So we have to be forgiving of ourselves first and foremost, and that, to me, will help get people's heads up and help us solve the biggest problems facing us, like climate change, like how we can actually help our boys become men. I mean, these are the fundamental problems.
Do you think Joe Biden broke any laws or his son broke any laws that they were trying to figure out with this Ukraine thing? Is there anything to that, or is that just noise?
I'm more in the noise camp. You know, I mean, like, I will say that when I'm president, like, my relatives are not going to be serving on the boards of any, like, you know, foreign
What about in your cabinet?
companies. Cabinet either. I mean, I've actually gone and said, look, I shouldn't be able to give speeches for money after I'm president, because it's human nature for me to go easy on someone who can pay me a lot of money for a speech after I'm out of office.
Yeah.
Like, you know, we need to just shut the door and say our president works for us, not going to work for anyone else. And then that should apply to cabinet members and top regulators. Because if you talk to top regulators, you find that there is this very strong set of incentives for them to go easy on folks, because they're just going to end up working for the companies after they're done.
Who do you think is other than yourself, who do you think is the best Democratic candidate?
Wow. I mean, that's a tough one to answer. I feel like you'd have to, like, combine us all into some sort of Voltron.
I like it. Form like Voltron.
Yeah, Voltron. I'd be the.
Well, I mean, we're living in a time.
What would you be? You'd be the.
I'd be the head.
The head.
We're living in a time where everybody gets a trophy, right? So why, everybody gets to be president. Why not? Throw everybody in
everyone
there.
together.
Yeah.
It's an interesting approach.
Yeah, have a committee. Why not?
Wow. Well, I
We
will
still have
say,
to narrow it a lot. It's still big. The
Yeah,
group.
it's so big.
yeah, I'd say that the vision I have is that a lot of the people who are running, we're going to end up in D.C. Working together, trying to solve the problems in some arrangement. So, it could be one person in this chair, another person. But a lot of the folks who are running are real public servants who just want to try and fix things.
Improve things for sure. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Andrew Yang. Yang Gang. Shout out to everybody out there. Make America think harder. I think you added the harder after you came to see us, because when we first met you, it was just like Make America Think.
Well, yeah, it was like a TH, was one of those acronyms. But then we realized that the fourth letter probably deserved its own word.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair.
Yo, give it up. Andrew Yang,
Thank you,
man.
man.
AndrewYang2020.com, right?
It's yang2020.com, or
Yang
you just Google
2020.
Andrew Yang. I pop up now at this point. Sorry, other Andrew Yangs.